The following is a KQED special presentation. Major support for Bay Window is provided by the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to the development of an informed California citizenry.
Welcome to Bay Window. I'm Gail Sheehy. As we've just seen in the Ken Burns documentary, Not for Ourselves Alone, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony opened the door for women to participate fully in society, to find their own voices, to lead more meaningful lives. Their courageous work expanded the possibilities for half the people of the nation, and the revolution they started continues to this day. Stanton and Anthony were bold thinkers and trailblazers. As a writer and observer of women's lives, I know that there are remarkable women all around us today, inspiring us with their words and their work, helping us move toward a truly equitable society. Tonight, KQED has invited 9 such remarkable women to join in conversation, with no moderator, no script, just 9 passionate voices sharing their personal stories and contributions with each other and with us. We hope you enjoy tonight's Bay Window special, Speaking Freely, an evening with remarkable women.
The 9 women who are gathering here tonight were all chosen in part because we found our way to some kind of an autonomy, which allows us to arrange a life so that you can write poems, teach, lead the life we wanted to lead.
We wouldn't be here if other women hadn't gone before us.
We were asked to think about what we want our work to do for the world or give to the world, and I think it's to open possibilities in so many ways for other women.
Tonight, this conversation has to do with planting those seeds, finding a way to start to work on the mechanics of that, the answer to the riddle for our daughters.
I really didn't know what would happen tonight, and I tell you that this has been one of the most rewarding experiences I have ever had. When in the world does anybody walk into a room that has 9 remarkable women in it? Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that the women's point of view is always presented as optional, as a minority, as a special interest event. That's really beyond obnoxious. You know, it's like out of touch, folks. It's like out of touch. So I don't think that there's been enormous progress since 1848 in that sense. I mean, I think it's shocking, we were talking earlier, that it wasn't until 1920 that we could vote. You know, why is it that that would be such a difficult thing for us to do, to be able to vote? What was the problem then? What is the problem now? Do you know?
I think public speech has been incredibly hard won for women. It's been something which over the past 2,000 years we have struggled to attain and lost and struggled to attain and lost. And I'm rather hoping myself that there has been a large change since 1848, and that in fact women are finding a voice that won't be lost again.
While I agree with you that more of us have a voice, like we have this program, for example, which you will also agree is completely exceptional. Okay. Anytime anything is happening in this country or the world that's important, and you turn on the TV or you pick up your whatever your favorite weekly publication is, Who's doing all the talking?
As soon as I got into the state legislature, I started counting how many women are here. In the assembly, only 1/4 of the people in there are women. And women are 51%, so where's our representation? It turns out only 25% of eligible women even bother to vote. So that whole consciousness hasn't happened yet.
Which whole consciousness?
The consciousness that Stanton and Anthony were looking for and trying to foster. I mean, a woman should be allowed to say, I don't want to have that 5th child. And it's her decision, not anybody else's. We won that right, 20, 30 years ago. We have to fight for it all over again because we don't have enough women in elective office.
What about you, June? And you're one of the most well-known, respected, admired, enthusiastically read poets in this country. How'd you get here? What happened?
My father taught me how to box, and I think that was the maybe most important thing I ever learned. Yeah, because he was a bully and stuff like that, and there were lots of bullies on the streets beyond my house as well.
Were you an only child?
Yeah, and I have a childhood memoir coming out next year called Portrait of the Poet, and you'll see I was raised as a boy. So one of the things that happened was I was taught how to fight, but specifically how to box, which is very precise.
I'm going to read your poems in a whole new way now. Faint jab.
But, there's the whole thing that you never take your eyes off whatever it is you're doing. More than anything else is the idea that if somebody hits you, you hit back. And you hit back as hard as possible and as fast as possible. So this changed my whole way of looking at things, and I think that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of the things I do. I love to fight.
Why aren't you in politics?
Happy. Huh?
Then why aren't you in politics?
I am.
We need you.
But not like you. I am in politics, but not like that. I try to expand how folks will think about things. I redefine what they think the issues are, and I also try to get people mad. Basically punch people in the nose sort of thing in order to make things really, really change.
When I first arrived in the legislature, I found that there is a women's caucus, and it was wonderful to be welcomed by them. But I was very dismayed to find that they don't take positions on legislation. So I thought this is kind of a cross between the old view of, women should be seen and not heard, or whatever you want to call it. They say that about children, too. It's a cross between that and assuming this new equal position in society. So if you don't take a position on legislation, what are you really doing there?
The goal, I think, for me anyway, is that with all the things that we're supposed to be, and to some extent we are, which is nurturing, caring, blah, 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 that we can also kick butt. You know what I mean? Kick butt and not quit. Does real female as well, I think, don't you think?
Yes, and I like that idea a lot.
Well, it's very interesting to me because there's a little overlap and a huge difference in how I came to this. I became a writer because I was going to my room by myself, stepping out of the fray and trying to discover who the human being was. Those words were shown to no one. They were written in the dark at 2 in the morning and hidden under the mattress. And in years of doing that, I began to discover a voice, a perception that I don't think I could have possibly done out there in the fray.
You turned from the completely private, stuffing it under the mattress, to bringing it before the public. How did you make that transition?
I took a workshop at UC Berkeley, where June teaches. And
there you go.
I was curious. I wanted to learn. I wanted to know more about my craft. I wanted to become more conscious about this thing that I already utterly loved. And once you're in a community with other people, certain dynamics begin to fall into place. And so I began to publish, and I began to teach in the Poets in the Schools program. My first class was a 2nd grade class, and I was so nervous. I dressed up in a tweed skirt, and I put on makeup, and I walked in there and shook. And then the kids started writing, and I was hooked, because I could see how words liberated people into their own lives.
I'm glad you got the stuff out from under the mattress. Because I'm not going into your bedroom, okay? You need to come out of there with whatever you got, and then we got to make some kind of connection. And do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm serious here. I need you, all right? But I need you to come out, you know what I mean, from wherever you're hiding away.
Well, how did you come to be in this position? How did you find your life bringing you here?
It was a virtual catapult. I was representing a party that is a third party in the state of California, the fastest growing party. And I was entering a race in which there was only one party represented. So in the interest of democracy and the choice that democracy is supposed to offer, I agreed to enter the race. The party that I was with had a definite message that was very different. When we're talking about universal health care and nonviolence and feminism as part of the party platform, these are things that are not being addressed by the majority parties in this country.
Well, sure.
So I had to make a choice, pull out all the stops,
Yeah.
go for broke.
Yeah. And win.
And I won.
Yeah, there you go.
What was the ratio of fear to excitement in this decision?
It wasn't really a question of fear. It was exciting, yes, but I just had the sense I had to do it because what I had to talk about was really important to me. And I didn't feel the message was going to get out unless I did it with all my heart.
It seems to me that a great many times when somebody does something that's a breakthrough, that's exactly how it happens. You're not thinking about, is this scary, or what will this do to my own life? You're just so passionate about something that you have to do it. And that's how the great revolutions happen.
I just think that if more women were thinking about their place in our society and using that thought to go and vote, we would have universal health care, and we would have national child care, and we would have those things that would show that women care about taking care of themselves. The kind of thing that at the end of her life, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was saying about the solitude that everyone faces. You need to be able to take care of yourself, and every woman has that job.
Now, why would this be a women's issue? Because everybody needs that safety net. Everybody needs universal health care, sons as well as daughters.
Well, I think there are two things. One is that, generally speaking, that has been shown to be the case. There is such a thing, as you know, as the women's agenda. I mean, there are some common things that seem to preoccupy those of us who are women, for example, and they seem to have to do with things like health care and taking care of our children, which is to say education as well, and training, and also has to do with things like not allowing our environment to be totally exploited for reasons strictly of greed. You know, I think it's very hard for any human being who has had the privilege of raising another person's, life, to be a mother, for example. That mindset to take care and to try and anticipate and to try and nurture, to go from that to a kind of either-or competitive way of looking at everything else in the world, I think it's very difficult.
When I decided to have a child on my own, the first thing I started doing in preparation for having the child was starting my own business so that I could run a business out of my home in order to be home with my child. And it's a whole different kind of planning when you're doing that on your own from if you're dependent on somebody else who's bringing home the bacon so that you have the complete freedom to do nothing but take care of your children. And that's the old expectation that women had a century ago.
And which is a narrow, complete freedom. It's
Very
a prison
narrow.
as much as freedom.
Exactly.
Most female life in the world, okay, you have to hope, first of all, that somebody finds out you're on the way, they're not going to snuff you out or drown you, okay. Then, if they let you grow up, you have to hope that they're not going to say, you could grow up but only like this, like that.
Or with your feet bound.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, to be female, apparently, is really not okay. All right? It's extremely dangerous. And for example, as different as each one of us is from every other one of us here, not one single one of us, okay, is able to assume safety in her home or in the streets. Here, in San Francisco, in New York, Hong Kong, I don't care. All right, Nigeria, forget it. We have to deal with a level of violent danger that follows from the fact that we are female life on the planet. And I really am very, very, very exasperated by that, okay? I don't like that. I think that's ridiculous. I think it means that we spend an incredible amount of time thinking about, okay, I want to go to the store, but it's getting dark, you know, sort of thing. Or I want to travel, I really want to see what's going on in China, the People's Republic of China. I have nobody to go with me. Is this going to work? Is this okay? Is this a really stupid thing to do?
But we're also taught to be afraid.
Well, one of the ways you're taught, though, is by, for example, being beat up or raped. That teaches you. Good. I mean, I've been raped twice, you know, so I learned, okay? Actually, both times I was inside, I wasn't outside. So this is not like, none of this is hypothetical for me. When stuff happens that really, really hurts and scarifies you to the soul, you go, whoa, wait a minute. But what is this about? What is the origin, okay, for that hatred that produces that kind of violence that we're constantly having to negotiate with? So I'm talking about levels of physical danger that have in common that they violate, you know, all the possibilities for your happy life. You know what I mean? Whatever that might be in yours and mine.
How do we foster a life where it's not considered exceptional for a woman to find her voice, find her freedom, find her boxing instinct? What can we do to help younger women find their way to the feeling that whatever life they have, it's a full life and it's their own life?
I think if I was a boy, I might have had a fuller expression.
Do you really?
Yeah, maybe. I think so for sure, right. I mean, I might have gone into politics the way you're talking about. You know what I mean? But I wouldn't have been on the state level. I'd be heading for the big house.
The door is open.
The door is open. No, I mean, it's like, for example, astronomy. You know, if I had been a boy, just for example, I mean, I love looking at the stars. Me and Galileo, right? But there's no model for me. Do you know what I mean? There was no model. There still isn't. I mean, for a girl going through school, you know, she loves to go out at night. Well, this is the first problem. Okay, don't do it. But if she can get to go out at night safely, and then she can get to a place where she can see all these stars and so forth, and she wants to become an astronomer or astrophysicist or something like this, what I'm saying is, where's the encouragement for that?
I don't know. I never had the feeling that there was something I couldn't do. Now, maybe that's odd.
Yeah, I think so.
But I had a lot of women teachers, I had a lot of women role models, and I actually did not feel that if I was interested in something, I didn't have permission to pursue it. What about you?
Pretty much the same. And I think for my daughter also, in the astronomy example, my daughter's had nothing but women science teachers, and I think that's great. But I do think that's relatively new.
But I think we need to also be real here and recognize how much we're not able to do. For example, the way in which a black woman, let's say a woman writer, a woman poet is treated, a black woman poet is very different from someone who is not black, someone who is not a woman writer or poet. That's for real. There are barriers to my exercise of my full potential and so on. But, you know, they are just barriers. I'm still here. I got a lot of energy.
I think for me, when I think about, you know, risks in my life, I realize they're almost all self-imposed. That the things that frighten me, I'm causing the fear. This is very different from what you were talking about earlier with fear of the streets and fear of violence, which is genuine and external. But I've noticed over and over again that it's my own internal terrors that I need to somehow go, okay, this is frightening, I'm going to do it anyhow.
I think it's a good point because folks seem to think that If you're scared, then you stop. It's like,
Right.
nah. It's like, you're scared, so what? You know, it adds a little bit to whatever it is. You know?
We never imagine it, though, in other people. You know, I don't think of Sappho as having been afraid. I don't think of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony as having been afraid. And nobody talks about that. And yet, probably they were.
The people who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, it was in response to a terrible situation. And I sort of see myself in the same role as responding to a terrible situation and not really having a choice about it, not thinking about being afraid. And at the point where you have that realization that your interference is really going to make a positive difference, you don't have any choice anymore.
Perhaps the essential task, then, is to find a way to self-esteem that is not easily perturbed. And I would like to suggest this. If you believe, as I do, for example, or something like this, that every single life is sacred, then you could say, that means mine too. That's all.
So it's personal. It's a personal act.
To discover for ourselves what needs doing, and then start doing it.
Oh, we're on our way.
Too slowly, but on our way.
No, we're on our way. We're doing what we can. Doing better than we can, actually. That's what they say where I come from.
Doing better than we
We're
can.
doing better than we can.
I like that.
Yeah.
Each one of our biographies or our identities has formed, and in our work and our lives have constructed each other. It's not that we have this work over here and this life over here, but in order to sustain this life, we have to do this work, and vice versa.
But the idea of art being life itself.
Yes.
And when I see your work, it's all there. It's your life interpreted in that.
Yes.
What we want our work to do for the world or give to the world is to open possibilities in so many ways for other women, the majority of women who still are not able to express their work because of really violent conditions of either poverty or patriarchy or modern globalism that's keeping them down, you know. I mean, I think of my work as being being a witness to the stories of my peoples and my times.
My work with incarcerated women has been just amazing because it's all about truth-telling and storytelling.
Yes.
And at the same time,
Yes.
the culture is so ready to hear these stories.
I came from such a difficult childhood that I had to make up a tenable way to see life. I probably would have gone mad if I saw life with utter reality. You take an immigrant child growing up in serious poverty.
Right.
Unless you create a sense of beauty, unless you see life in a different way, it's almost overwhelming, you see. But my mother would take an eggplant and a couple of strands of scallion and bright red radishes and a green pepper and make this magic composition that made life worth living for me. She had this need to translate beauty. She was my first teacher, you see.
I was a migrant child. My mother always worked. You know, the fields, cotton, cabbage, working in warehouses. But my mother's search for beauty was in her gardenias. So she would graft. She grafted 3 different kinds of gardenia bushes. And we had gardenia bushes all out in front of our house when I was very small in Florida. And then my grandmother would give us the duty of raking the yard. And then part of raking the yard was making patterns in the dirt, so that it was very beautiful from the gate. You could come in and this dried, dusty yard would all of a sudden have these beautiful rake patterns in it. But this was early, the seeking of beauty in work.
We are all gifted, you see. We are gifted with eyes, and we're gifted with ears, and we're gifted with 10 fingers, and we're gifted with a soul, and we're gifted with a heart. And that's where the art comes from.
You know, I feel like a conduit. I feel like I was sent to simply to open this way and help give people permission to take center stage and to examine your own life.
When you are doing that conduit thing, it's incredibly powerful. I mean, the lightning bolts are emanating, the power's coming in from all 4 corners, all 4 directions. Mother Earth, Father Sky. Exactly. And yet, you know, what you're celebrating is that you can access that, and you can get other people to access that in themselves over and over.
That thrill of excitement when you make contact with someone else and you have enriched their life at whatever level it's possible
Well, before I met you and I read your biography, when I realized it's the woman who had designed the Corningware that I've been using for all these years, I sort of got chills.
Well,
because, you know, I have been cooking in her designs for all these years, and it's so fabulous.
It's very interesting.
And that's been denied to me. I had no idea women did that.
But I want you to know how that happened.
Do tell us.
It doesn't come out of the sky. I told you that in every one of those technology developments, hundreds of people have been involved. Many years have been involved. I played a very small part in it. And the small part was that I was doing what I think my life is all about. And that is to make life easier for the women that are doing their work to provide for their families. During the war, those women went into the war, and it was obvious from my research that they were going to stay in the work scene. But they were also going to be women, and it's natural to nurture. It's natural to provide the sustenance for your family. And in 1957, the Corning Glass Works had a rare technology in their command, and they originally invented that as the missile cone. You see, and the claim to fame was that this material would maintain its integrity going from the Earth's surface to outer space. And so what I was trying to do was to figure out some way how could that material, which took this remarkable heat and cold, that you would be able to prepare a dish in a vessel. You would be able to take that same dish and put it in the freezer and come home from work and take it out of the freezer, put it back on the stove, and then that it was white and it was attractive and it would go to the table, giving dignity to the whole family because they didn't have to eat out of a pot. So when I say that designers have to be good people, I'm talking about spiritual goodness.
My son, he's always playing the devil's advocate with me. He's an engineer. And he says, Mom, whose kids are you trying to save anyway? Because I'm an educator and I spend so much time with my students. And of course my answer is everybody's, and you're part of that, you know. But, you know, having a son and a daughter, trying to open the world of a feminist perspective for both of them, for my son first, who's 22, you know, to try to show him what my sensibilities are as a woman, for him to know as a man, so that he can open those doors for other young men and other women, you know, as well as for my daughter, who I don't want to have to repeat the lessons of sacrifice, abuse, and vulnerability that we ourselves have been subjected to. You know, that's fundamental trailblazing, you know.
A trailblazer is a risk taker that goes into the forest and marks the trees to define a route that is taken. And every woman who is a parent is responsible for that phenomenon.
What I found out with raising my daughter was that I knew that I could take care of another human being, which is an incredible sense of self-worth, of strength. It's like, and now I have a granddaughter, so I look at the two of them and I think, there's triplicates of me, you know, and it's like, and I have played a part in the lives of both of these people. That is worth 300 points, you know, in the culture. That and what we grapple with is the idea that it is not honored, you know, to be somebody's mama, you know, to be a housekeeper, you know. I mean, to rear the nation. And I used to say to women, you have got to ground yourself in your history, you know, her story. Who, you know, let's begin with your great-great-grandmother. Let's go back as far as we can. And that is what we're talking about, the matrilineage, because I'm Rhodessa, the mother of Sandra, you know, the daughter of Estella, the grandmother of Chas Nicole. And it has grounded me in a certain way that means something. You know, that moving through the world with that means something to me.
Just putting yourself out there, being willing to claim your voice. You know, this country has a legacy of the town witch. It's very difficult to live the kind of lives we've lived. Choosing to be an artist is probably the most difficult path you can choose through that forest.
And very dangerous if you don't watch out.
Being on a scaffolding 5 stories high, that's a risk, getting up there. Not only the physical risk. I think I was telling my young male assistant the other day that I've been physically attacked on my scaffolding 3 or 4 times by men on the street.
You mean like them coming up or just shaking
Yeah, coming
it,
up,
messing
shaking the
with it?
scaffolding. Twice the police have been called.
Telling the truth is dangerous.
It is.
That's a really dangerous activity. It has to be done.
The truth is that women have a lot of reasons to be mad as hell. The truth is that discrimination against women is a universal phenomena, still, you know, and women play a large part in that. These are truths that I know. These are truths that I've learned. The truth is that we have not yet learned anything at all about our bodies, really. More money is spent on the study of AIDS and AIDS care than breast cancer. This is the truth of women's lives. What does that mean, you know?
And you see, we're not just women. We are citizens, we are mothers, we are sisters, we are daughters, we are a whole
Soldiers.
spectrum of other activities. But very specifically as women, we have what it takes to have the courage to speak the truth, make the truth, and live with the truth. And those of us who don't are very vulnerable and setting the stage for being a victim.
Yes.
Women classically assume the role of being the victims.
Well, I think
And I don't think we're going to be victims much longer. I think that's where the new breath of fresh air will come from.
And we're not going back.
Yeah, I love that about young women, a lot of young women. I mean, I love it how they stride through the streets. They're not having it. You know, I mean, they are not having it. And it isn't always pretty, but it's incredibly eye-opening to witness it.
We're taught not to trust our truth. We're taught not to listen to ourselves. We're taught not to focus on those voices that are shouting, you know, don't touch me.
Yes.
This is mine. Out of my face. You're wrong. You know, we're taught not to say that as soon as possible. And, you know, when we do see these young women, you know, being rude like that, it's like, well, vámonos, you know, let's learn to be rude in a righteous way. Because, you know, I want my daughter to say, don't, stop it. No is a complete sentence. All of those things, you know, that have taken me, you know, a long time, almost 5 decades, to be able to say no.
I have bruises to show for all the times I didn't say no.
Yes. Yeah, I'm still grinding my teeth at night in my sleep for all the times I didn't say no. But in the Medea Project, we have Baby Medea, and that's for the daughters of incarcerated women. And one of the things that they learn right away is the no chorus. You know, and say no, and how loud can you scream no? Yeah, and I already see it in my granddaughter. She lives in New York, and I said, "Oh, you're wonderful." She says, "I know." Says, "Oh, you're so smart." She goes, "I know, I know," and it's totally unself-conscious.
You see, I think when she says "I know" that way, she's ready to take responsibility
Yes.
for being smart and being pretty.
I hope so. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, let's be sure that
I'm
that's what
planting
that
that.
is.
Yes, I'm planting that. That's what I hope that part of the work that even tonight this conversation has to do with planting those seeds, finding a way to start to work on the mechanics of that. Of
Right.
how do we unravel this business, or how do we start another kind of tapestry that inside of that is the secret, the answer to the riddle for our daughters. My hope is that they will be as free. My granddaughter will, her children will be even freer, and it won't be any phenomena to be an astronaut, to be an architect, to be president, you know, if one so desires. You know, it's like, it'll just simply be the order of the day. You could just, the menu of life will be that much more expansive, is one of my hopes, you know, for our daughters.
You've given me a lot of encouragement.
And likewise.
And I need the encouragement, because sometimes I really feel battered in other ways. There's a kind of sexism that is very subtle. And I must say, when I hear people talk about, we ought to have a woman on this committee, or we need to have a woman here and there, as far as I'm concerned, that's overt.
Or a Chicana, or a black
Any of that, any of that.
Age is the same way. It's like,
Yes.
oh, don't tell your age, or, you know, and it's like, hey, better get in line, take notes, okay?
That's
I mean,
right.
it's like,
That's
when,
right.
you know, I feel like getting older comes with this incredible power. And I want to make, you know, menopause and hot flash, they should be household words. You know what I'm saying? It is no longer a secret, you know? And
let me tell you,
there
Seeing
you
it.
are.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's
gets
great.
You are living
by the
proof, my darling.
time, by the time you get into that 80s,
Yes.
it is absolutely gorgeous. And I wonder why everybody's so worried about getting older. I went into the makeup room and I said, I don't want to do away with any of these wrinkles.
No.
I worked very hard.
You've
for
earned
these.
every one of them.
They're
Why?
beautiful.
Exactly.
You know, I'd love to do your portrait. I want to say something about the hopefulness too, about for the next generation or the next 7 generations. You know, I think that what we have to create as artists, designers of our lives, is rites of passage that clearly demarcate the move from victim to activist,
Yes.
you know, from consumer to creator, so that these young people coming up really see that they have a role.
We need to. Again, it's empowering, you know, for us to share information. And that's an excitement just about the differences, too, the diversity. You know, despite whatever's going on politically or somewhere else, I think when we are one-on-one as 3 remarkable women, you know, we are ready, more than willing to celebrate that, to discuss that. Yeah.
Spread the word.
Yes.
What struck me when I received this invitation was the term remarkable. I can look at the two of you and say, yes, I know what that definition is. Women who juggle many things and who have products to show for their talents. But it made me think about the women I work with and how remarkable does apply to women who overcome, women who are in situations of poverty or in situations of violence, or women who are homeless. When you consider domestic violence, 50% of homelessness among women is caused by violence.
When you get to know any woman well, and you hear what she went through, it's remarkable. And often she doesn't think so, culture doesn't think so, because this is just what women do. Keep the family together, have babies, survive through a lot of different things. But when you hear the details of it, it's really remarkable.
When I see a woman breaking out of that old stuff, the old addiction, the old battering, the old violence, the old circumstance that keeps her in prison, it inspires me to continue and to do more.
I have just begun to be active again in my way in what I think is the next wave of the women's movement. Here we are, a generation of women who have been inspired to have bigger lives than we possibly could have had without the women's movement. And those women, us, went off, did our thing, got overly busy, and then around the time that you get to be menopausal, the nest empties, your job changes, what have you, and you can have 20 more years or 30 more years, and you're wiser. And you might be inspired to make a difference at this point, because it's payback time for us. It's give-back time.
That's true.
What if 45 million women reaching the age of about 50 in the next 5 years got together in circles again told the truth of their lives, tapped into their wisdom? Wow.
Jean's newest book is about women's circles and how they're changing the world. And I'm writing a book about women's salons and how they impacted culture. You know, people like the women of the Left Bank of Paris and Mabel Dodge, who actually was very influential in the first wave of feminism, because Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Emma Goldman and all kinds of those sheroes were in her salon, where it was, of course, an intellectual, cultural, artistic thing, but nevertheless it was a circle, and they changed the world. And so what drives me is that I sort of, pursue my passions, and it seems that they're always about women and the great things women have done. And by looking at that, it tells me what we still need to do.
That's very good. You know, at Glide we do have circles, and the women who are in those circles, I believe, are some of the most courageous women that I know.
Are you in a circle?
We as staff have to be in recovery all the time, because otherwise we get our butts kicked all the time by people, who say, well, you can't talk about this unless you're living it, and you can't talk about, compassion and love.
You have to be real.
You have to be real, and I think that's part
marvelous. It keeps you from being like an icon up there.
Absolutely.
It really grounds you.
The ground is very level where I live, and the greatest lessons that I have learned are from the women who are in the circle, who I'm, eye to eye with, and who teach me things about myself that I would never dream applied to me. And the fact that they are so fearless astonished me, about things that you just don't talk about, whether it is abuse, whether it is...
But Janice, you've modeled it for them.
Well, thank you.
You've written poetry about your own abused background, and when you role model that, you serve as an example that says if she can do it, and she's still standing, and in fact I love her more because I know this about her, then they can too. And then when you teach them how to write poetry, or not teach them, give them permission to write poetry, then they go right into the soul level, because poetry is really the language of soul.
That's right. And that's been a very powerful metaphor for myself with my family. My mother, for example, keeping silence about the Japanese American concentration camps that she and I also, but all of 120,000 of us were incarcerated in during World War II. She kept her silence for 40 years. And that was a very important historical moment when she decided to testify and break her silence about that experience. It was as if, she was unlocking history for me.
When you are treated badly by your government or by another person, at some level, I'm ashamed because I must deserve it.
You must deserve it. I think for me, that breaking of the cycle of shame happened when, again, the circle of the community began to talk to each other, validating each other's feelings, like, yes, I felt shame. How dare I feel shame? I did nothing
That's
wrong.
exactly like the women's movement.
Yes.
The consciousness raising groups of the 70s. We did that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it is what incest survivors are doing.
Yep. Whenever you try to fit the image that other people have of you, whether it's what I grew up in the 50s, which was be quiet, get married, have kids, that was just accepted as what I would do. But because I had a mother that went into medicine, which I have ended up doing, and that extra generation made it that much easier for me. But what also paradoxically made it easier for me in some ways is that I never fit in like I might have if I had been racially white middle class. The models that were presented to me, I could not do. So then I would do what I wanted to do or I had a talent for instead.
I know about not fitting in.
Yeah.
You know, I came from a really, really conservative background in southeastern Ohio, you know, where you don't dance and nobody drinks and things like that. And I like to dance and drink. I'll just come out and say it. And so I felt like a complete oddball, like, oh my heavens, like my family used to say, my mother always said, we got you mixed up in the hospital. You're not the one we were supposed to come back with. And I started believing that because I got blackballed from church camp, which was like this enormous source of shame for my family. And it's kind of a funny little story. It was during the era of CB radios, remember that?
Yes.
And so I had never seen a CB radio before, and I was like talking to it and playing on it, and people were talking back, and I guess it was a bunch of truckers who decided to come to the church camp to see who I was. And that didn't make them too happy. And so they had a big prayer meeting for me where I was the bad fallen one. You know, if they could have had neon over my head saying evil, they would have. The pressure was enormous for me to say, yes, save me. And instead I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not a bad person. Forget it. And so because I wouldn't toe the line, they said, okay, you're out of here. And they actually wrote a letter that got sent to like every church and camp saying that I could never return to church camp. I was ostracized.
And yet it was a major defining moment.
For you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much an e-ticket to California, too.
Well, don't you think that that's where we find common ground, is in the margins, where we have not fit in, some of us disenfranchised, some of us made invisible.
But the difference between then being victimized and changing and having an authentic life is that you have a moment when someone is putting you down and you say, I refuse to accept your definition of me. And she did it at 8. And
Pretty good, Brenda.
so she got an early start. It's harder for women to get there because for something like 3,000 to 5,000 years, the culture has defined women in terms of inferior. Spiritually, women have been told we were not made in the image of God, men were.
Well, wait a minute. Woman's the fall of man.
Or the fall.
That's what I remember.
Right.
It really seems to me that it's when women become aware of their own essential soulful or spiritual nature and tap into what they know inside about themselves, about our connectedness, and essentially start to draw on a wisdom and stop looking at those mirrors out there that say you're bad if you don't fit this, you've got to wear this kind of clothes, you've got to say this proper thing. And instead of looking out there, to feel your way inside and know that you came into this life with a purpose. I mean, one of the things that most people know in their bones is that life has some meaning. And when you find that you're living a life that's personally meaningful, you're kind of in your groove. You're doing your life. And it doesn't mean that it's easy. sometimes people who are doing the most true thing for themselves are really going through a hard time, but it matters to them what they're doing.
In California, especially the Bay Area, we get the message to have permission to be ourselves and make our own place more, but I don't know about Peoria.
I bet in Peoria and all kinds of places, if we only had a different kind of media.
I agree with you. The media has a tremendous amount to do with image. We've been so programmed to look at our weaknesses as opposed to our strengths. And we're perceived only for our body. Our worth is defined by who loves us as opposed to, our defining our worth and our defining who we are and our defining our strengths. But I don't know, Jean, coming up and looking at the media and seeing those images of white women who are, either buxom and blonde or very, very thin. I mean, I can never fit that, and I always felt invisible by that. And I do think you're right, that it does require us to write those books and us to, to define what is strength and what is beauty. Because, if we look at ourselves as victims, and that's how we will be perceived.
It's like, what do we admire in each other? Not what the media looks at, but what do we admire in each other? And are there women who we could call heroes or heroines?
Well, let's talk about linguistics for a minute. The words you just used were heroes and heroines, and that totally points to the reason why I did the book Sheroes. There's no word for female heroes. And so I didn't coin it, actually.
It's a great word.
Right, thank you. It actually came from Spelman College. The first person I heard that used it was Dr. Maya Angelou in a speech. And I was so struck. When I heard the word Sheroes, I just felt like this electricity in me. I guess that's inspiration.
Yep.
And so I didn't immediately think of doing a book. I immediately actually started listing out who my Sheroes are. And I have files of about 800, and there's about 300 in the books, and they're everyone from Amazons and goddesses to people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And it's been interesting to see the reaction to the book. It got huge media, and while that sounds all good and everything, actually a lot of it was negative. When Howard Stern wanted to have me on the show, my publicist was, it's a national break. But I said, I don't think it's the kind of attention we want. This is about celebrating women's strength and what they contributed. I will not allow them to be made fun of by Howard Stern.
Well, I was going to ask you how you define Shero.
Okay, it's a woman who has done something remarkable. So I guess, like I said, you two are Sheroes. And usually a Shero is controversial. She went out of her way to make change. She made a contribution to womanhood and to humankind, actually. So the Sheroes come in every imaginable, color, shape, and size.
But the most heroic women often are the women who didn't choose what happened to them. So it's like, what do you do when unchosen circumstance comes along and you have to do something?
Women do what they do because they must, to make sure that the next generation survives. They bring that forth. I mean, I think of Rosa Parks. I don't believe that she went on that bus thinking, okay, I'm going to make a stand today. I mean, it was a circumstance that drove that decision and created an incredible moment in history. So
one of the turning points for women is the enough is enough moment.
Enough is enough.
Yes. It's frustrating because I think, okay, we have come a long way, like they say in commercial or whatever it is, but there's a long way to go for women.
I think that there needs to be a revolution in terms of how women feel about themselves, how women think about themselves. And I'm not just talking about women who are affected by poverty and feeling the powerlessness of that condition, but, I look at women in general and, the issues around sabotage in the workplace and self-sabotage and issues of what is, how do women define power?
A lot of my girlfriends, have jobs where they're working like 40, 50, 60 hours a week and working, just as hard as the guy in the next cubicle or corner office and making less money. That's still very true.
We do have so many of these areas that we have to address. Lower pay in the workplace, not equal pay for equal responsibility. In fact, women tend to work harder because we've always had to prove ourselves
Oftentimes.
more. And I think that has to start with us. It has to start with the woman.
I find myself listening for what rings true inside and then doing that. And sometimes it's not easy and has caused me to get into trouble with institutions and with individuals. And sometimes it's been lonely. And sometimes, as of right now, with a feminist activism rising up, it actually is quite fun. I mean, some things are harder. Life gives you the assignment of making it through your cancer diagnosis or something. There are hard assignments. And then every once in a while, one comes along that's fun. So to tilt the world towards a post-patriarchal era by drawing women into more and more circles to change the world, this is fun.
I've been watching you, and you have been having fun. So I had one question for you, Janice. If Glide Memorial has a church camp, can I come?
Absolutely.
Right.
You're my shiro, dear.
All right.
Great model for other women.
Thank you.
You too, Jean. Thanks.
Likewise.
To join the conversation, visit our website at kqed.org/baywindow. Tell us about the sheroes in your life. Parents can find tips on how to raise remarkable young women and young men. For teachers, gender lessons in the classroom. Learn more at kqed.org/baywindow.